Hey, English 11, it is Friday, April 17th, 2020, and today we are going to be reading The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. This was the text that I introduced to you yesterday. It inspired the Frogumentary and the frog competitions in Calaveras County, the Jumping Frog, and it's written by Mark Twain. This was one of the stories that put Mark Twain on the map. It's going to give you a taste of what his style was. Just so that you have some understanding of context and the impact of this text. At that time, this was hilarious. Okay, this was comedy. This was comedy gold. So it's probably not going to be super funny to you right now, and that's okay. We're not necessarily reading it for that purpose, but I want you to understand that Mark Twain became famous because of the story. This was entertainment when it came out. A couple things to know before I jump into reading. Near the end, our Jim Smiley main character bets $40. And I want you to understand that that's actually $575 if it was today. So it's a really big bet. And as I'm reading, follow along. And things that you're going to be looking for that you'll have to respond to eventually are irony, satire, which includes irony, and then trying to understand if this is a realism versus naturalism text. Remember, there's no right answer. You just have to support your claims with evidence and explanation, okay? Realism versus naturalism being the traits that we took notes on, all right? So the idea of naturalism being a losing battle against an uncaring universe, or realism about the struggles and plights of everyday people. All right, I did cut this text down quite a bit in order to shorten it so that this lesson isn't super long, and I kept it to just the important parts of the story so that you can follow the plot. So following along, I'm going to give this an accent because you're supposed to. It's going to be bad. Okay, I know that, but maybe it'll entertain you today. So this is The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County by Mark Twain. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the barroom stove of the old dilapidated tavern in the ancient mining camp of Angels, and I noticed that he was fat and bald-headed and had an expression of winning gentleness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner and blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat me down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows this paragraph. He never smiled, he never frowned, and he never changed his voice from the gentle flowing key to which he tuned the initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm, but all through the interminable narrative there ran a vein of impressive earnestness and sincerity, which showed me plainly that, so far from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about this story, he regarded it as a really important matter and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius in finesse. So now I become Jim Smiley. There was a feller here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of '49. Or maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly, somehow. Though what makes me think it was one or the other is because I remember the big flume wasn't finished when he first came to the camp. But anyway, he was the curious man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see. He could get anybody to bet on the other side, and if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Any way that suited the other man would suit him. Anyway, just so he's got a bet, and he was satisfied. But still he was lucky, uncommon lucky. He most always come out the winner. He was always ready and laying for a chance. There couldn't be no solitary thing mentioned but that feller'd offer to bet on it, and take any side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds sitting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly first. If he even seen a straddlebug to go anywheres, he would bet you how long it would take him to get wherever he was going to. And if you took him up, he would follow that straddlebug to Mexico, but what he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once for a good while, and it seemed as if they weren't going to save her. But one morning he come in and Smiley asked how she was, and he said she was considerable better. Thank the Lord for his infinite mercy. And coming on so smart that was the blessing of Providence she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, well, I risk 2.5 that she don't. Anyway. So already you should be seeing a trend here with Jim Smiley. Uh, what does he enjoy doing more than anything else? What's the morality behind that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? All right. And he had a little small bullpup that took to him as you'd think he wasn't worth a cent, but to sit around and look ornery and lay for a chance to steal something. But as soon as the money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw began to stick out like the forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine savage like the furnaces. And a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him and bite him and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times. And Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on but what he was satisfied and hadn't expected nothing else. And the bets being doubled and doubled on the other side all the time till the money was all up. And then all of a sudden, he would grab that other dog just by the jint of his hind leg and freeze to it. Not chaw, you understand, but only just grip and hang on till they throwed up the sponge. If it was a year, Smiley always come out winner on that pup. Till he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs because they'd been sawed off by a circular saw. And when the thing had gone along far enough and the money was all up and he come to make a snatch for his pet holt, he saw in a minute how he'd been imposed on and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak. And he peered surprised, and then he looked sort of discouraged like and didn't try no more to win the fight. And so he got shucked out bad. He gives Smiley a look as much to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog that hadn't no hind legs for him to take hold of, which was his main dependence in a fight. And then he limped off a piece and lay down and died. It's not funny, but they thought it was really funny. He catched a frog one day. Here's the story. He catched a frog one day and took him home and said he calculated to educate him. And so he never done nothing for 3 months but sat in his backyard and learned that frog to jump. And you bet he did learn them too. You'd give him a little punch behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a donut. Seen him turn one somerset or maybe a couple if he got a good start and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. He got him up in the matter of catching flies and kept him in practice so constant that he'd nail a fly every time as far as he could see him. Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything, and I believe him. Why, I've seen him sit Daniel Webster here down on this floor. Daniel Webster was the name of the frog. And sing out, flies, Daniel, flies. And quicker you could wink, he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off the counter there and flop down on the floor again, as solid as a gob of mud, and fall to scratching the other side of his head with his hind foot as indifferent as if he had no idea what he'd been doing any more than a frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was. For all he was so gifted, and when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was a strong suit, you understand. And when it come to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellows that had traveled and been everywheres all said he laid over any frog they ever see. All right, so let's measure this up. So far, we've got Jim Smiley, who loves to gamble and to bet, okay? He used to have this dog that would win all of its fights because it would latch on to the other dog's hind legs and just kind of like hold on and drag him around until he won. But then when one of the dogs that was submitted to fight didn't have hind legs, he couldn't do that, so he lost, and then he just laid down and died because Mark Twain decided that was true. Now he has this frog, and he taught this frog for months how to jump as far as possible and how to catch flies. So now this is going to be his new magic thing where he's going to use this frog to win all sorts of money. hence the competition that started in Calaveras County. So let's see what happens. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometimes and lay for a bet. One day, a fella, a stranger in the camp he was, come across him with his box and says, "What might it be that you've got in the box?" And Smiley says, sort of indifferent like, "Might be a parrot, or it might be a canary. Maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog." And the fella took it and looked at it careful and turned it round this way and that and says, so 'tis. Well, what's he good for?" "Well," Smiley says, easy and careless, "he's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." The fella took the box again and took another long, particular look and give it back to Smiley and says, very deliberate, "Well, I don't see no p'ints about that frog that any better than any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs and maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you've had experience and maybe you ain't. Only an amateur, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion and I'll risk $40 that he can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." And the fella studied a minute and then says, kind of sad like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here and I ain't got no frog. But if I had a frog, I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, "That's all right, that's all right. If you hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the fella took the box and put up his $40 along with Smiley's and sat down to wait. So we sat there a good while thinking and thinking to himself. And then he got the frog out and prized its mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot bullets. Filled him pretty near up to his chin and set him on the floor. Smiley, he went to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and he finally catched a frog and fetched him in and says to his fella and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside Daniel with his full paws just even with Daniel, and I'll give the word." Then he says, 1, 2, 3, jump. And him and the fella touched up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off. But Daniel give a heave and hoisted up his shoulders so like a Frenchman. But it wasn't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as an anvil, and he couldn't no more stir than if he was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted too, but he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. The fella took the money and started away, and when he was going out the door, he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulders this way at Daniel and says again, very deliberate, "Well, I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better than any other frog." Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Daniel a long time, and at last he says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed out for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He 'pears to look mighty baggy somehow." And he catched Daniel Webster by the nape of the neck and lifted him up and says, "Why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds," and turned him upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest of man. He set the frog down and took out after that fella, but he never catched him. And here, Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the front yard and got up to see what he was wanted. And turning to me as he moved away, he said, "Just set where you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second." I started away. At the door, I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and he buttonholed me and recommends, "Well, this here Smiley had a one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump like a banana, and oh, hang Smiley and his afflicted cow," I muttered good-naturedly, and bidding the old gentleman good day, I departed. And that's the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. So, where's the irony? Where's the satire? And is this a realist or naturalist story? That's your test. We aren't going to be doing that until Monday, but make sure that you have this read and remembered so that we can do that work on Monday. Also, I'll put this on Google Classroom, but we do have our test next week on realism and naturalism. It will not be timed, all right? It's also not one that's like, it's not multiple choice or anything. It's reading and analysis. So Hopefully it works well for the digital settings. Students usually perform really well on it, so I don't want you to be nervous about it. You get to use all of your notes. Okay? All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.